Okay, you guys can see my team profile functions screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So one of my probably top two or three challenges for the next 3 to 5 years is trying to transition the hundred some courses that we have that I've been the primary maintainer of and working with adjunct faculty to other people. And tying this in with City Vision 101, this is trying to transition, from um, a time teller to a clock builder. But the challenge is now, right now, a lot of the tasks that Sandy is doing are in the developed stable. It's like copying courses, and we go through a checklist each term. And what we're trying to do is to get more people to cover the develop. So Sandy will do some of that. Brian will do some of that. Potentially Evan and Aria in the future could do that for, probably a smaller list of courses. But the challenge here is most of our courses, I would say, are an A or a B. And what makes our courses good, coming again back to tying things back to City Vision 101, I would say about two-thirds of our courses are highly customized, and that fits our business uh, value proposition. That essentially we have two things that makes it unique. One is our affordability. Two is our customization for our audience. So develop stable means it's not customized, or you're not going to change it. If you're going to change it, you start to go into the develop stage. And this is more like maybe a 10 to 20% change. If you start to do a bigger change, you're getting into design develop. That's probably anywhere from, it varies. You're kind of in between if you're at like 30 to 50, but if you're more than 50% change, then you're really into design develop stage. Now, there's some courses that are more generic, like accounting or project management, that maybe only require, say, 10 or 20% customization, where there's other courses that require high customization. Um, so the big challenge is to try to get more people who can do this. But the problem is in writing a really effective course, especially if it's customized, it's kind of like writing a life transforming sermon or writing a best selling and life transforming book. It's just really difficult. And what makes it even more difficult is if you're writing your own sermon, that's one thing. But right now, if you're updating a course, it's like editing someone else's sermon that would have been a B and trying to make it an A, or it was an A minus and you're trying to make it an A plus, which is even harder. So my history in this has been probably 80 to 90% of the time, course designers take a course that's a B and they make it a C, because they basically put it in their image rather than in the student's image, or they follow what's considered general best practices rather than contextualization. So what I'm going to try to do is train you in this. This is more of an art. The more you go over here, it's more of an art. It's more creative. So with that, let me just provide a little bit more context. So this is a comprehensive course and program curriculum map with revision schedule. So the idea is we got to go through and update all these courses every 5 years. And with that, the other thing is, what we're trying to do, and this is kind of the development map, is, people come in to be, visiting adjunct faculty, and they take our faculty 101. And then now we have faculty 201, and that's where you learn to be a course designer and to revise courses. The problem is, I need to do a major revision of Faculty 201, because it's just insanely difficult to teach this. And the grammar of course design is what's taught in most instructional design. You can go take a certificate on instructional design, but honestly, all that stuff is going to teach you is the grammar. So you can get a well-edited book, but it's not going to be it could be a horrible book. You know what I'm saying? So it doesn't teach you how to make it good for the most part. I mean, it does somewhat, but for the most part, I would say 80, 90% of what the field of instructional design teaches doesn't get to that kind of creative aspect. It's, to put it in competing values framework, it's in the control quadrant rather than create quadrant. So Okay. Now I'm going to use this course and what I've been doing. So we have a revision log for moderate revisions, and I'm going to use what I'm doing in this course redesign, and I'll try to make this a little bit bigger for you. Um, and talk about what I'm doing. So why did I choose this course? So, and this is part of what Evan and I need to work out is like which courses are going to be selected for major revision. For the most part, what we're trying to do is goes into an ROI calculation, like what we're going to talk about in lesson 6 of City Vision 101. So this course right now is probably the highest ROI improvement that we can do. I know that this course is not great, maybe a B, but it's probably not a C, but it's not a high B probably either. So it's still 90% following the design that was completed in 2008 and doesn't follow most of our best practices. So there's a lot of things in the course develop or the course design system, our course management system. We have this best practices, and there's a lot of things like are we using Google Docs and various things. So it's not doing most of the things that we've upgraded over time. So that's one, but there's a lot of other elements that make it not very strong. So then so that's one of the problems. But the other reason why I want to do this is I just did a graduate version of this course, and I want to take some of the content from that, and I don't want it to be, this isn't in the constraints. I don't want more than 20 to 30% overlap between the courses, since some students might take both. Now, there's a lot of cases where we do want there to be overlap and one course can substitute for the other. I don't know that this is one of those courses, for a variety of reasons. But the other reason that I want to update this is one of our probably top 5 core competencies in terms of content areas is in cross-cultural ministry. And we have probably 4 or 5 courses that do a deep dive on that. And it's been highly contextualized for our audience. We haven't done that at all for counseling. Like we're just using largely generic material on counseling. So, um, you know, so I want to translate the graduate version of the course. I probably want to incorporate this tip 59, improving cultural competence, because it is really good material, and I'm kind of surprised it wasn't in the course. And I don't want to change the study guides or quizzes because of the amount of work that would be involved with that. A lot of this, again, on ROI is I'm trying to think about I got maybe 10 to 15 hours, and how can I maximize the improvement in this course in 10 to 15 hours? And so what I'm going to do is in this case, I'm going to work with Sandy to do some projects, and I'll kind of walk Sandy through this. But I also want to walk you guys through some of the changes that I've done. And so down here is where I've uh, you know recorded some of the changes. And what I'm going to do is try to explain to you. Let me duplicate this and try to show you kind of the before and after on some of these things. So now I'm doing these edits live. I'm not going to let other people do that because I need to review and approve them. But because I'm both a review and approval process, I can do them live in the course. But I'm going to show you kind of the before and after on this course and relate it to the changes that I did. Now, this is probably closer to a design develop change. And this is, I told Sandy, like, it took me probably 5 to 8 years before I was ready to do design to develop. Now, that's partly because I wasn't teaching and reviewing our courses intensively, but it takes a while to get good at this. You don't, if you're new to giving sermons, your first sermon's probably not going to be the I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King Jr. It's going to take a little while on this. So, part of it is there's a significant learning curve. So, with that, let's see, okay. So what I'm going to do is walk you through how I went through is, so I looked at the course, you know, and so this is the old course. The old title was relationships and urban stress. From my perspective, it's not a very strong title, and it doesn't summarize the content. The whole goal is to summarize what you're covering in that week, and this isn't a very good summary. So I wanted to cover cultural identity. So a lot of this, again, it's an art form. So going back to, and I didn't list all the changes, but um, I'll go to the, week one, read and the week one, some of the other material that we have. So week one, read, I added this ethnic identity development process for Christians. For people to be doing multicultural counseling and not to understand ethnic identity development is kind of like saying you're going to take calculus and you don't know your times tables from my perspective. And so it's kind of core content. If they go on the management side, they're going to get this, but there's not a whole lot of overlap between stuff on the management side. And so this one didn't have that. Another thing, and I'm not going to fix this in this course, they're just using a generic Christian counseling textbook in this course. That doesn't make sense. But I'm not going to try to fix that because it would require like taking apart too much of the guts of this course. I think it's okay to do that, but I don't really understand why that was done. That's not how the graduate course was done. So anyway, so I look at the read content. I liked it. So this has listen, which is really old school. Like we used to have a big archive, and I'm not a big fan of the listen, so I might still replace this. Let me just look at it. Um, yeah, I don't know that this is going to be the best use, so I might consider replacing that. A lot of these old listen, unless they're really good, I generally don't want to keep them in most cases. But there's things you could do like, and I'm not going to go into this. There's Google AI Studio where you could download the audio for this and then summarize the transcript to try to get a feel for how good is this. But the production quality on these things are not very good. So again, this is like how we did courses in 2008. Now, the discussion, and this is again symptomatic of what I call lazy design. So I'm going to go and compare the two of these. So this first one was and all the discussions in this are lazy design. So please introduce yourself, including your name, nonprofit organization, job title, and ministry you're associated with. That's all you're doing. And then they're using the Young Typology Personality Code. I got no idea why they're doing that in multicultural counseling. I mean, that's an important counseling concept, but I would never do that. And we cover that in our vocation, calling, and purpose of work course that everyone takes for the most part. So um, this was just random. So I kind of took that out. And then what I did is I copied some of the so in the graduate course, and let me see, do I have that here? So this is the original text of the graduate course. So I incorporated aspects. I just cut and pasted parts of the questions here. Because I've explained to Brian that whenever I write a course, I probably work the hardest. Well, if it's a project-based course, I'm going to work the hardest on the project. Then the second hardest is on the discussions. And then the third hardest usually is on the assignments. But between those three things, if I'm going to spend, say, 10 hours on a course, those three things are probably going to take up 7 of my hours. And everything else is 3 hours. So like part of it is where do you do your focused thinking? I have pretty high standards for discussions and things like that. And in the 201 course, I do have a lecture on how to design discussion questions, but I'm not going to go into that right now. Okay, so this cultural profile, I put this back in, Evan. This is now available again. So we may want to consider putting that back in that other course.
Okay, I'll do that.
And hopefully it doesn't disappear, but it was good.
Yeah,
So
no,
I
it's
did
great.
that, and I also did the cultural identity development. These are great questions. Like people love sharing where they are. I mean, it just draws out a lot about the person sharing, their cultural identity development journey. People love these type of personality tests where they share that. So you take a question that honestly is super weak. You got one question that's completely generic, just an introduction, and another question that doesn't even fit with the course. And you replace it with something that's going to be honestly a home run in terms of the discussion, like cultural identity development. In 2 paragraphs, summarize your own ethnic cultural identity development. You're going to really get to know people through that. So that's much better than just generic introduction and then doing this. So they're going to leave this feeling really good. Now, I talk about this in discussions. A lot of the first discussions, I'm trying to build trust. Like a course is just like creating a church group or something like that. You don't like, the first couple of weeks, you're trying to build trust. So that's what I'm trying to do here is to get people to share in that. So, okay. The other thing that's crazy about this is there's 2 different study guides, and then there's these responsive papers. And so one of the things in our best practice checklist is, can we get things into Google Docs? So I explained to Sandy, part of how we architect is, in 2 years, we are likely going to be using Google Docs integrated with Canvas. There's a Canvas integration, and all students will use this. It will automate the creation of Google Docs. It will automate the feedback from faculty to students in their document, and it'll just greatly improve our processes. But the problem is that takes a lot of time to set up, and it takes a lot of time. Every student has to have a cityvision.edu email address, and they have to be able to use it. The bigger part on that's going to be they're going to have to be able to use that at least for Google Docs, and a lot of like we have to start supporting that. So that's going to be another like 10% of student support once we have to start doing that. So I'm not super eager, but it's going to greatly improve our quality. So we're trying to kind of gear towards that. But just in general, from a course management perspective, having things in Google Docs is a lot easier to maintain, because otherwise what I got to do is I got to download every one of these study guides, and then I got to edit it, and then I got to re-upload it. And then sometimes we got the old version, and then, the student's still using the old version because we didn't link it correctly. It's just a nightmare. So from a maintainability, having things in Google Docs is much better. So so part of the other thing that I'm doing in this course redesign is I removed the personality assessment, I updated the discussion, and I'm assigning to Sandy to move all the study guides. Now I created a template for this. And I put this template in the course. So if you go up to the top of the course, you'll see, do I have this in here? No. All right. Well, on Google Drive, there is a course document. Oh yeah, here it is. The Google Drive. So there's a Google Drive, and I made sure that I saved this in there. And so what I want you to do, so your task is going to be to merge all the study guides into the Google Drive. Now, I think, let me just look and see if they're in here. I think these study guides are all in here actually. So Healing for the City, study guide 1 and 2 is right here. So it'd be fairly easy. And I'm just going to start the first one, and I'm not super psyched about how this is going to come across, but let me just, put a so we, part of what we're also trying to do is to have consistent design standards. So this isn't very good design standard. So I'm going to take out, let's see. I don't know what so the title needs to be changed, but I'm going to, try to take this out and move it into our standard format. So what we'll probably do is we'll do Healing for the City as heading 1. Let me think. No, we'll do week 1. And then each book will be its own subheading. So I'm going to paste Control Shift V, paste this text. And so then what I'd want you to do, Sandy, is just try to, quickly clean this up. And make sure, so looking at this, I don't think either in the assignment or in the study guide are we, and one of the key things on assignments is, have you fully defined the scope? are you asking them to write 3 pages on each of these questions, or are you asking them to write, 1 paragraph? And man, it's horrible how many of our courses don't have that. So, and then what that does is, and I explained to Sandy, like our whole goal in this is let me just show the zone of proximal development. Um, so the big goal in design is that what you're trying to do is to improve the scaffolding so that your zone of proximal development is this. So this is what our students could never do ever. Like if I had them do doctoral research, they just can't do. And then, or no, this is what they can do, sorry, on their own. This is what they could never do. And what we're trying to do is to take this middle part of the donut and make it as wide as possible. So things that they can't do, if we add more scaffolding to it, then they're going to be able to do that thing. So a lot of times what happens is there's stumbling blocks because we're not precise in our instructions, or we don't provide examples, or we don't provide templates. And the students can't do this thing. We're saying, draw a picture that's comparable to Monet, and they're drawing stick figures. And we never showed them Monet, anything from Monet. We never gave them basic lessons to get there. So they're just drawing stick figures. So, for a lot of our courses, and that's what a lot of these best practice elements in here. I think, do we have an item on here on examples? We might want to add
Um,
that.
Model assignments? No, not yet. No.
Yeah, we probably should add that. A
Yep.
lot of courses don't need model assignments. This course, I don't think really needs model assignments, but any course that's project-based, we want to have model assignments. And the quality of the model assignment usually is the number one factor that can improve, getting people closer to Monet and less than stick figures. Because if they see something that's an approximation of Monet, they're not going to turn in a stick figure. They're going to understand the bar is set higher, and they're also going to understand how to raise the bar for themselves if they can, look off of other people. Does that make sense for folks? Okay, so what we're trying to, and again, these are other, barriers. Like part of the reason why we go with Google Docs is most of our students don't have Microsoft Word, or a good portion of them don't have Microsoft Word. So it just makes it easier so they don't have to worry about that. Um, I don't know if the assignment instructions specify whether this needs to be APA, but in general, this is 300 level, so it's kind of borderline. Most 300 level, we are requiring APA, but I don't really care that much about APA and study guide. So
If it's
let me
study
just
guide questions on these, usually no, because they're just brief. They're not a full
Right,
paper.
yeah. So let's just look at the instructions here. I haven't updated this. Study guide, there's a chapter outline and then questions that pertain to each chapter. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
they're
we
just like
need to
short
add,
questions.
so part of what Sandy's going to need to do is she's going to need to add detail on this as she goes through. Um, so Sandy, and part of what we do is we do iterative design. So you never want to do like 4 weeks at once unless I don't have time to review things. So, we want you to do 1 week, then I'm going to give you feedback, and then you do it again, and then you do it again. Like I'm working with Brian on designing the group counseling course, and I think we've gone through 3 iterations on how we're going to set up the structure for the actual live Zoom sessions, because that's the most important part of the course, and he needs to get that done perfectly before he's going to copy it across 8 weeks. So it's the same type of thing here. Like, where do we add the detail, on these questions? How do you set it up to make it easy for the students? Do you want them to write under each question? And if you do you want to get rid of the bold for them? Often that's what I will do, under and you could, put um, like, write 1 paragraph, below, write, let's see.
In the graduate Bible course, I just put in parenthesis how
Yeah,
long the responses to each were supposed to be, and there was space so that it was clear um, for each question where
yeah,
they would
okay.
put their response.
Yeah, so I would go through and clean this up, get rid of the bold, clean this up. Um, and, even things like this course has been renumbered, you know, so this is another annoyance. So, um, and so this is just something you got to scan and edit. Just say this course. Um, and again, we don't answer the scope. Like, how long is this outline supposed to be? You know, so this is bad design, you know. So I'm kind of ashamed at how bad the design was back in 2008. So anyway, all right. So all right. So I showed you the study guide. So what you're gonna do is um you're gonna do Healing for the City here. And then at the bottom, you're going to do another one for the other book, right? So let me just see what the other book's called. Do I have it here? It's under Read. Christian Counseling That Really Works. Uh, and you can copy those study guides in there. So somewhere in here, I think is probably going to be the study guides for Christian counseling. Yeah, here you go. Christian counseling study guide. So you kind of do the same thing here and then clean that up. So part of what's happening, and Sandy, increasingly this will be, you know, this will be how we will work on something like this that is in the design develop phase. You know, most of these things are kind of, this type of cleanup is like largely stable, like, sorry, not stable, it's uh, develop stable with a little bit of develop. Like there's certain things of like setting up the structure. But you know, in the cleanup, I mean, this is more of an editing task, right? So, but over time, you can kind of, you know, figure out some of these bigger picture problems. Okay, so this is merging the study guides, replace assignments with language similar to assignments in ADC 505. Let me explain to you what that is. So because I don't know that I fully explained that, but um, all of our courses follow a similar model on how we do Google Docs. So what you want to do is you want to put most of the instructions actually in the Google Doc. And let me just see if I can find where we have this. Reflection.
This
Yeah,
course
okay,
is a
yeah. So we
little
have this
anomalous.
reflection journal and video study guide. So I'll make it clear that you know that's what you're copying from. But the basic model that we follow is in the first one, we have something like this. Click on the following link to create a copy. Throughout this course, you will work on this each week. You should build on the document you created in the previous week, complete one. And, you know, but you would reword this because, you know, one, this thing has a different name. It's not a journal, it's a study guide. Um, Now, there might be some things out of this. And, you know, there are some best practices that I like to implement that aren't in this, um, you know, we care more about the higher parts of Bloom's taxonomy. So, and this is a 300 level course, so I at least want them to get to apply. So, you know, one of the things, and let me just see what he did for this course or what we did.
They're mostly from the
Right.
textbook.
Yeah, I know. But usually I'm asking like, how does this apply to you? So after reviewing, um, yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I will do a generic question, and so like you know, going into this, um, man, this is a lot of questions. This is a lot of questions, you know.
Mhm.
So, and what I would want you to do, like if you're going to delete questions, I want you to do track changes. But and you can see formatting issues, you know. If there weren't as many questions, I think I would probably have you. So this is an example where I might want you to do is just, you know, in one paragraph, how does this material apply to you in your current or past context or something like that? Does that make sense? So that's like a, you know, generic question, but honestly, half the value of this is going to be that. Like, having a 300 level course, it's okay that some of this is going to be, regurgitation, and, some of these just try to assess, um, do these questions make sense, because not always do they make sense. So, and this is a lot of what, I mean, Evan is, I've said he's probably the best editor I've ever seen because Evan can almost edit it as quick as I can read. I don't understand how he does it.
The personal
So,
the personal
um,
finance and wounded healers have some really good examples of application. Also, personal health. Those are a few
yeah,
courses that have some really
okay,
good ones.
okay, yeah. All right. Well, anyway, you could copy this, and the idea behind that is the first one is where you create it, and then in the later ones, you're just referring to it, because you don't want them to be creating a copy. Um, oh, did someone update this to add that in?
Um, it's just a cross-reference back to the first week to
Okay.
say that they should be using the
Does
same.
that get updated automatically with each course?
Yeah, all links within Canvas are relative.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, that's fine. So anyway, you would copy something like this. Now you can't copy that link because that's going to actually be cross-linking to courses. So this will only work. And I don't know if Evan's trained you in how to use Canvas specific links.
Yeah,
Um,
we talked about it.
okay, good. Okay, so anyway, we're going back into the design. So what you're going to do is you're going to start with week one, have me review. Um, you know, we may change the point value because what we're doing in this course, um, now it's starting to get difficult to navigate because I got too many windows open. Let me try to close some of these. Um, all right, so now what we're going to do in this course is we're merging these two into one study guide. And then a lot of these responsive papers, they're not that good. So I'm not sure. I mean, I think what I'm going to have you do, and I think I put this in the instructions, I'm going to probably have you merge those into that. Um, okay, let's see. So Sandy, week two. I think I haven't figured out what I'm going to do with that assignment, but I'm probably going to have you move that assignment to something else. So in week two, there's a counseling center assessment that again is using a Google Doc. For the most part, we're trying to replace all Google Docs with something else. And anytime you create the Google Doc, create it in the folder for that course so that it's easier to track down later. Um, update the language to include click to create a copy, delete the original file, create similar. Um, I don't know what that is. So I was typing, probably got interrupted. Um, so these are the main comments that I have for you, Sandy. I'm going to get you more over time. I only got into week two. So let me come back to what else I did in week two. I also like to keep a log. So this is my quick scan of other things I might add. Like there's certain topics that were covered in the graduate course that are pretty critical. Like social class is huge. My number one beef with multicultural counseling is there's all these schools that set a price that basically exclude anyone who's not, middle class and above. And then they have pedagogy that provides only a racial lens without a real social class lens. And what that does is it just wrecks things for our students because our students have to be thinking about social class and because their mission is defined as generally serving the poor and the homeless, at most of these rescue missions. So if they're not using a social class lens, they're losing out. And all the academic material, I mean, just to put it in my own terms, to be blunt, all academic material is brutally social classist. It's classist in a way it's hard for me to unpack all the reasons for that, but we have to basically address that. I mean, one of the reasons for that is they never talk about social class other than either in academic terms or in quantitative terms, both of which aren't kind of the preferred form for people who come from lower income backgrounds on how to discuss social class. So, but in most cases, they don't even talk about social class. It's just something in a list of race, class, and gender usually. So anyway, that's a little side thing on multicultural. Bias is really big now. I don't know if there's going to be room in this course. Again, trauma, like if you talk about multicultural in our context without talking about how that relates to trauma, it's a huge deal. I don't know if we want to cover gender. Again, I feel like that's a pretty big overlap, but or not overlap, oversight. And then I may want to create an overview video. So those are things that I'm looking at. Week 2, let me show you the before and after. I'll just kind of explain to you what I did. I retitled the week. I added a reading from tip 59. I showed you that document that I created where I used our Notebook LM on rescue mission values to create this unique approach. So I used the core textbook and I tried to create this document. Someone needs to proofread this document and also make sure there's nothing crazy in it. But what I was doing is relating rescue mission values to the approach and healing for the city to
Okay.
try to better contextualize.
I'll proof it.
Okay. And then I updated the discussion. I'll show you that. I have no idea why the Zoom meetings in week 4. Often what happens in our courses, and again, this is part of why our courses are locked down, is we make a change for one faculty member, like say they're out of town in week 2. So we move it to week 4, and then that gets copied forward for eternity. And that's not what we intended to happen.
In the past few years, we've always rolled those back because we had notes of them. So I think
well,
in that one, I think that may have had some
that
other
one
reason.
slipped through.
Okay, but there is a
So
process for that that we've been following, generally speaking, in recent years.
yeah, okay. All right. Well, okay, so let me show you the before and after on some of these changes. Hopefully I can get the right course. This is 2004. Let me see. This is 2005. All right, good. Okay, so I'm going to show you before and after on the discussions. So the title before and after, have I renumbered this? Yeah. Principles and challenges of lay counseling. I have no idea why they picked that. So that isn't even what the topic is. Whenever I look at the content, I'm like, there's a little bit of this that's covered, but that is not what the focus of that week is about. So unique approaches to urban ministries and multicultural counseling. So it's essentially like, relating it back to the content. So, as I mentioned, I added in these elements, the unique approaches to counseling of gospel rescue missions and similar ministries. And then, I did add in this tip 59. So here's the other thing. I mean, this course is atrocious. So this was a C. Let me just say. So, a lot of our courses, it's like apartments, right? So you got an apartment that hasn't been fixed up since 2008. The toilets are broken, half the lights don't work, the paint's peeling, there's holes in the walls. So that's what we're doing is we're trying to go, but you don't know what these problems are until you actually go and do a deep inspection on these courses. So like this week had one chapter. The last week had like 5 chapters. Why? That doesn't make sense. So anyway, because there was a lack of content, I decided to add a bunch of content here. And I think the key thing about this week was about contextualizing, right? Now let me just look at the watch. Oh, this one was excellent. So I decided to keep that, and I actually added that to our history. I had never seen that video. So that was definitely good. So the old discussion was basically, again, a Lacey discussion. It's like, watch the video. What theme stood out to you? Explain 3 points. It's just, man, ChatGPT can do better than that. You know what I'm saying? We can have ChatGPT look at that, and then you could say, write 3 discussion questions for an online course or 5 discussion questions. It would come up way better than that. So
Oh.
our goal should be to be better than ChatGPT. if we're not better than ChatGPT, we should just all fire ourselves and let ourselves be replaced by AI,
Mm.
which is not what we're trying to do, right? So, um, anyway.
Andrew, I figured out on the Zooms, there's Zooms in weeks 2, 4, and 6. So this
Oh,
was
there's
one
three
course where we
Zooms.
elected to
Oh,
have
okay.
3 Zooms, and that's why
Okay.
there's one in week 4. I
Okay.
mean,
All
we
right.
can
That's
change
fine.
that, but that's why it's set up that way.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I think that's fine. That's good to know. Thanks for clarifying. I didn't look and do a deep dive. Okay, yeah, I see that. So I'm going to go and re-edit these Zoom meetings because again, those are things that often the questions are horrible or there's no questions, and
Yeah.
like the title is Lay Counseling and Urban Ministries. That's
That's the
not what this
topic
week is
too. I just
about.
checked.
Yeah. So I haven't updated week 2 yet. So but let me go into the differences on the discussion. So what I did in this is after watching the video, so I kept the first question, but based on the material this week, what's unique about the approach of rescue missions and similar ministries to multicultural counseling? If you've worked in a similar ministry, describe and answer this question based on your own experience. So, we're trying to relate it back to experience. I do not like people to end up with regurgitation. We're trying to, regurgitation is okay with 101 and 201 level courses, but I don't like it in discussions. There's no value of regurgitation in discussions because everyone just says, here's the 5 points that was covered in this video. That's not, put that in the study guide if you want, but don't put that in here. Then reflect on the material. So the material in tip 59, the first 2 weeks is talking about cultural competence. So we're trying to basically get them to appreciate the concept of cultural competence. And part of this question, a lot of times I put questions in the affective domain, meaning like I'm trying to get them to value the content. So the affective domain is more how they relate to the material in on an emotional level. And one of the big barriers for learning is just most people don't really value it. They don't know why this is important. So what I'm trying to do is get them to recognize why it's important. Um, and then this one's the most complex question. Um, you know, Having them compare. So, tip 30 or 59 is a secular context, right? And this is about urban ministry. I want them to actually compare their questions or their answers and, like being able to share the gospel with people, being able to, there's a lot of other elements that might be helpful. If you're working for a rescue mission and similar ministries, it's not going to be in, tip 59. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
Yes.
So, okay. All right. Um, okay. So let me just close this. All right. So coming back here, I retitled, updated the discussion. Okay. Yeah, I can get rid of this since Evan addressed that.
Yeah, it's
Um,
worth stating one thing that I often do, Andrew, and you may disagree, but I look when I'm thinking about a revision in a course like the Bible theology courses, which I'm kind of the owner of right now in the undergrad, is I click on the assignments tab early on to kind of give me an overview of what types of assignments and quizzes and Zooms are in the course and what weeks they slot into,
yeah.
because then I can
Well,
kind of think about that as well.
yeah, I mean, you can do that view. I prefer to do a week by week view because usually the problems
Well, I
that I
do both.
see are lack of linkages between assessments and content. And um, even this one, like week 2, I don't know what happened, but over the past like whatever 17 years, it probably got edited to where like the title doesn't make sense. There's no alignment. It's almost like you got questions that are not related to the content,
Yeah.
and I'm just like, how does this happen? But
Yeah, no, I
anyway,
agree. I mean,
um,
yeah, I definitely look at both.
yeah, I
I
mean it's
like
not
to,
bad to scan it, but
yeah, I
usually
scan it. I
I do
don't
a
spend
week
a
by
lot of
week.
time on that because
Yeah,
I got to go into the details, but it helps to see things like on the Zooms, for example.
right.
And
Yeah.
also like on
So
that this is one of those courses that has a midterm and a final. So I
let me
know
see.
that like that is sort of dependent on the textbooks that those are
Yeah.
going to pull from
Okay.
that.
Um, okay. I did not do this yet. Um, wait. Need to. Okay, I did. So it says update. I haven't updated. So these say added. So anyway, so this is how far I got. I had, probably 2 or 3 hours. So I did most of these changes in 2 or 3 hours. So and for this level of working, I explained to you guys in the City Vision 101, um, you know, there's deep work, right? So, and then there's efficient work. So this is deep work. So solving hard problems. So this is uninterrupted time. This is like turn off notifications. Don't check your email. You got to have at least a block of an hour because honestly, it takes me about a half hour just to get to where I got a grip on this thing. But usually I like to have maybe a 4 hour block. I usually do this on Saturdays. For this. So you're trying to go into this space, you're trying to get into a creative space. I personally will, you know, drink more caffeine whenever I'm doing this just because and I usually do it in the morning whenever my brain is optimal. If I never do this like in the late afternoon, whenever like, from 3 to 5, my brain just can't do anything. So I think that that's a part of the key. Um, and yeah, I think that ultimately, so this is a fairly moderate revision. So Sandy, this summer you're going to be going, and this will be the first course you'll be assigned to update will be the project management course, and I'll explain to you the scope of that. But that is I would say, so there's always a question of what portion of this needs to be customized. Project management, the Christian integration is not that significant. Right now, that course is 100% generic. Um, we could use probably 10 to 20% practical application. Um, like when I, and there's a few ideas I have on that. Um, One is, okay, what are the big projects that missions and ministries often run into? So building as a project, possibly. The other one is maybe some sort of event planning as a project. So, one of the patterns that we're starting to do in our course designs, and I'll just use this as an example, we have a generic business plan course. And part of what we'd like to do is to turn it from being a generic business plan. And I'll use the business plan course as an example on this zone of proximal development. Um, so right now, the business plan course, we're getting a little bit better than stick figures from people, but we're not getting legitimate business plans from people. So what I'd like to do, and for a lot of our ministries, there's maybe 5 or 10 standard social enterprise models that they're going to follow. There's, having a catering business. There's having a thrift store. Thrift store is number one. There's maybe running a cafe or some sort of, other food service related business. Sometimes they'll have lawn care or sometimes they'll have cleaning services. So what I'd like to do over time in that course is to use a business term, to go vertical. And what we would do is, Jeff Cook is going to basically, over time, build out some outlines of legitimate business plans. So, say a food service business or a catering business, because they have a very successful catering business. If someone's launching a catering business, they don't know the parameters of how the business operates. How much do you charge per plate? How much do you get, per meal? It's all the data that's going to define whether or not your business plan is going to be successful. And if Jeff can provide that data, then they could adapt that data into their context. So then we've expanded this donut hugely so that they may actually get a business plan that could be viable for their ministry versus like, what's happening right now is they're not providing any of that data, or they're just making it up and it's off by probably a factor of 2 to 4 in most cases. So in your case, that's part of what I'm trying to think about. Okay, are there examples of that we could apply to project management? I don't know. I'd have to look at the course. Um, let's just say that course has a final project that's based around a project. Then what I might do over time, and I probably wouldn't have you do this time, but over time, I might start to create tracks. So if someone wanted to do a big project plan, for the final project, then you could have a track for event planning, a track for building. And then you could actually try to get some of our partners to provide their project plan they use to build a building. And, so I also might want to interview one of our students, Jody Ann Mulcher, or Mulch, I think. Um, she, in her graduation interview, she said that that was her favorite course. I was kind of shocked because I didn't think it was that good of a course. And but she's very senior in the Salvation Army, and I want to understand why that was her favorite course and how she uses project management. So, like another thing we could do is, send out an email to students, and this is if we wanted to really get deep, send out an email to students who took that course and say, just do a couple questions like how have you utilized what you learned from this course? Because I don't fully understand how to contextualize it. Because the reality is almost no mission uses heavyweight project management tools like Gantt charts. And that's most of what project management's around. So what I'm trying to figure out is, but they need to understand the concepts and what does that look like? What do they need to know? It's not that we can't teach Gantt charts, but we don't want to have like most project management courses would go deep into Gantt charts, and that's not going to be that helpful. For our students, because what happens is they get caught in all the technology, of Gantt charts and getting the dependencies to link up and all this. And if you use things like Microsoft Project, man, so clunky. And it's great if you're building a giant building and you got like hundreds of dependencies, but most people don't have that, right? So anyway, so that's an example. But the reality is, what I'm going to want you to do is teach that course, observe what happens, find the problems. I don't generally want you to make changes in advance because I want you to, it's not a problem unless it's a problem. And often what will happen if you went and pre-diagnosed it, you might get it wrong. You might, your first instinct might be to like, hey, let's align this with project management certification. And then you're going to go deep into Gantt charts. After teaching it, you'd be like, yeah, that is definitely not the way we want to go, as an example. So those are some of the things. And, over time, like with Brian, he's going to need to be the one to update those 33 courses. And then we got another 70 courses that, we need to update. And I need to find people to be the owner of those. Now, I may just continue to be the owner of 20 or 30 courses. And to a certain extent, it may be that we kind of co-own these. The reality is, and this is the other thing that's just worth explaining, the hard part of course design is largely in the tech side these days, and it's in the design side. It's not in the content side. AI is kind of commoditizing the SME area. And most schools, 90% of the course revisions and design is being done by the instructional designer, not the faculty, because the faculty don't know how to do it well.
Right.
But accreditation doesn't reflect that. So what we're doing is we're just centralizing a lot of that. We often have to bring in a faculty SME as a part of the process, depending on, like with a lot of these courses, I say I'm the owner, but I'm not really the owner in terms of DEAC. It's just I work with an SME, and sometimes I do half the work, and sometimes I do 90% of the work, and if I'm lucky, I do 20% of the work, but that's rare. So does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
I do have one question.
Yeah.
So I don't think I'm fully understand which course I need to work in. Would it be the summer 2025 course?
You're not working in any course.
Okay.
Wait, hold on. Um,
The major project revision or
yeah, the
major
major
course
product,
revision.
most of your work is going to be in the Google Doc itself.
Okay.
There will be minimal work in the summer 2025. Yeah, sorry, I misstated. Yeah, because I mean, think about we're doing this for the summer 2025 term. That's why we're doing it now, is we're trying to release it for that. Does that make sense? I showed the 2024 version because I wanted to explain to you my process on this. So, what happens is you copied the 2024 into the 2025, but I made changes directly in the document or directly in the course, but I wanted to show those changes. That's the only reason why I referenced the 2024 version. Does that make sense? We
Yeah.
never do edits in courses that are already have already had students in them. And in fact,
Okay.
that's from an accreditation perspective, that would be a major faux pas. Because what you're doing is you no longer have a correct trail. Like students submit an assignment, and if you change the instructions for the assignment, you don't even know. There's no paper trail to show what was changed. So you can't go backwards and do that. So does that make sense?
Yes. So like for week 2, replace these things, it's under me, but you'd want me to do it here in the Google Doc or in the
No, I'm okay with you probably just doing it directly. I think that's defined enough scope that I'm going to be comfortable with you doing it directly in there.
okay.
Does that make sense?
Just want to make sure which
Yeah.
which I'm supposed to do here in
Yeah,
the
no, that
Google.
was a good question to ask. So,
Hmm.
yeah, any other questions that folks have?
Yeah, all that makes sense. And it's the kind of things you talked about before, Andrew. I mean, we've talked for many years about issues with that counseling course. I just didn't have the subject matter expertise to, or time to really address them. It's worth stating, I've dropped in the chat, there is a final project in the project management course, but it's sort of like just like a report, not like a real final project. And
Yeah.
as you go through the weeks, there's a lot of stuff on different forms of charts used in project management. It's not really like aligned to a particular project. It's
Yeah.
primarily aligned to a textbook on how
Right.
project
And
management
and
is
that's
done.
fine. I mean, sometimes our main goal is how do we design this course quickly? Because, so basically, if you look at our two value propositions, courses are usually going to be bent towards one or the other. It's either going to be inexpensive. So like you're looking for, so we're going to do a course on customer service. Um, Probably 70 to 80% of that is going to be generic. So I'm going to be looking for how do I design that course as quickly as possible with some Christian integration. If I could find a good book, I might do deeper Christian integration. I haven't found the magic book I'm looking for right now. But if I did find a magic book that kind of really is the spirit, the Christian spirit behind customer service, then we might have a good framework for Christian integration. Because a lot of what we're trying to do with our students on customer service, it isn't the mechanics, and that's what you're going to learn. And I was at Burger King, you learn to smile and you learn the customer's always right and things like that. It's the heart level. Like you never once make a customer afraid that you might kill them. And it's not that you do that in your language, they can pick it up non-verbally. Like if you're someone who got out of jail and you used to beat people up for fun,
Right.
they can tell that you're about ready to lose it, and they might, like it's that heart change that needs to happen. You know what I'm saying? So that's the problem.
Yeah.
Is for a
Emotional
lot of
regulation.
people is, how do you change so that whenever your trauma is getting triggered by this customer who's in your face, you don't have a reaction that makes them afraid that you might beat them up in the parking lot. So yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
I think my favorite project of my whole project management career was a day in the life of a project manager. And basically, it was scenario based,
Yeah.
where you got a scenario and each person got a different one. And then you had to apply what you'd learned about being a project manager to solve the problem. I think that one was really cool.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, a lot of times, whenever I'm looking at a course, there's kind of like how much creative freedom you have in a course. You have to assess how full is this course to begin with. So I might actually have you do like an hour study on the course. So, this course, it varies, from week to week. Some weeks are full, some weeks aren't. So like if I'm going to add content, part of what I'm trying to do, again, using, like if you've ever seen a house get remodeled, and so you can gut the house where you basically get it all down to the bare studs. And that's what a major, major redesign is. So I did that with some course recently. This one I'm hoping isn't that bad, but that just takes a huge amount of work. It's almost as much work as creating a course from scratch. Sometimes it's more work.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to avoid that. So with this course, part of what I'm going to do is force you to do it in a limited amount of time, because you have to be able to make these choices. Like, I'm going to leave this course still not feeling great about it. But, the fact that I told you that my opportunity cost of my time, I generally value at $200 an hour. So if I spend 10 hours on this, that's $2,000 of opportunity cost that I've spent to revise this. So I could make it even better and spend $5,000 of opportunity cost on it, but it's not worth it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Oh.
So
One example, Andrew, was that when we did the Theology and Strategies of Urban Ministry course, at least from my
yeah,
perspective, that one was really major because since we replaced one of the textbooks entirely, that just had ripple effects onto so many things.
yeah.
And
So
then
changing textbooks,
it
removing
was also really
quizzes.
uneven in terms of like the hours. Like I didn't do a formal hour study, but it was just wonky, and so that took a long time to
Yeah.
fix too.
Yeah. A lot of the courses, if we adjusted quizzes, we just removed them. And part of the reason for that was, DEAC was their whole ethos was based on correspondence courses. And quizzes were really big. And even now, quizzes are really big. And like Michael Limata, who designed a lot of these courses, I mean, Michael never been trained in course design. He just made this stuff up. You know what I'm saying? But so the quiz quality varies. So honestly, most of the quizzes that have been done, probably ChatGPT could do a better, you know, assessment on the quizzes. So at some point, we may add quizzes back into some of our courses now that there's a good methodology for using AI to add quizzes back in. But we took quizzes out of a lot of our courses. You have to assess what we're doing, on that and how much of a redesign. But so part of what you'll need to do, Sandy, is whenever you work with me, is you got to be constrained to the scope that it's got to be easy for you to spend $5,000 and to make it good. And that's not going to be worth it for me. The efficiency, you got to feel some of the efficiency pressure on that. So it's, I'm working with Brian on designing this course. My guess is he's going to spend this next course, the group counseling. He's probably going to spend maybe 50 hours on that. He's designing as good a course as possible with him spending 50 and me spending 10 to 20. And it may not be ideal, but it's good enough for now. And often what happens is we design the course and then we realize that we misunderstood our audience in some fundamental way. So we actually have to redesign a third of the course anyway. And there's other things that can happen, like the trauma course out of the courses I've designed in the past, I don't know, year or two is probably the worst one that I did. Not because it was bad, it was just it probably had about 180 hours worth of content in it in total, or 180 hours worth of activity. So we had to pare it down later. In that first group of students, was feeling the pain. Now, part of what we're trying to do, the big picture on courses, it's the funnel. So, you have the student services funnel, like students are encountering crises that aren't our fault. And then you have the academic funnel. They're encountering stumbling blocks that are our fault. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to keep students from dropping out or failing a course because we didn't make the zone of proximal development donut as big as possible. So our end goal is to make this as big as possible for everything and to avoid stumbling blocks. I mean, we've got students, maybe a third to half of our students are trauma triggered, and they get they encounter some sort of difficulty, and they just their life's crazy, and they just freak out because this assignment didn't make sense. And that's our fault. And then they quit the course and they quit the school. And I never want that to happen. So that's what we're trying to fix. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Or other courses, like social entrepreneurship has gotten better, but that course is definitely in our top 5 most difficult courses. Probably 3 years ago, I looked at the final projects in that, and it was really like the kind of, I want them to paint Monet and they're painting stick figures. And so students were nowhere near the end goal of that course. So we made some adjustments on that. So that's another way that courses, so people weren't dropping out of that course. They were like saying, look, I got these awesome stick figures, but they were not getting the course at all. And, so we had to make some adjustments, based on that course. Like that course is very advanced, concepts. So, But yeah. Okay. Um, anything else? Okay.
No.
So Aria, I know you and I talked about the possibility of you serving as a side contract as adjunct faculty. That's kind of a prereq to be able to, you have to see what the courses look like on the inside. And usually I would like to have you work on a functional course. Sandy, part of the reason why I had you do Wounded Healers, one was it was perfect for acculturation. The
Mhm.
other, but it's also perfect for in terms of life transformation. That and our vocation, calling, and purpose of work are probably our two strongest courses. And so, whenever I say we're setting a high bar, project management, that's not the primary goal of project management. We're not looking for life transformation, but there's a lot of that's a high contextualization course too, right? So I wanted you to see what that looks like so you can understand, other courses. But Aria, do you have any questions on any of this?
I do. I actually really enjoy doing stuff like that. So that's what I was doing from home until I got a job with you all. So my only concern was that I've actually only done things from scratch.
Yeah,
And from what I've heard from you from the Zoom, that's not really what you're looking for. But I have
right.
added some stuff to the folders for what I did for the University of Tennessee.
Yeah,
And then I'll add what I've done for the University of Georgia. But it's pretty much. I spent about a week reviewing their website in the class and reading the course material, skimming it.
yeah.
And then I created quizzes and assignments and projects based off of that. If they're going to go abroad to a different country, then I cater it to that. So
Yeah.
I'm just not really sure how that would fit, but that's something that we can discuss later.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, that's a part of the job description for doing this type of work. Can you work in the developed stage?
Hmm.
If you can't work in the developed stage, then you can't do this work.
Oh,
If you
well,
have to do
sweet.
design develop, then I think you can because like your current job is, doing. So most of your current job is in the developed stable, um, and so this is worth talking about. So a lot of the work, like if you have a standard operating procedure for something, it's in the develop stable phase for the
Hmm.
most part. Develop means that you can't fully define this. And design develop. So what you're describing, a course from scratch is in design develop. Now, um, part of our philosophy is how do we get things more affordable? And this is one of the patterns of technology is you try to push most as much as possible as you can to the content and the course and less to the faculty. So like let's say a typical course might be half the work's done by the faculty, half the work's done by the course. Half of the quality comes from the faculty, half of the quality comes from the course. What we're trying to do is to improve the quality of the course so the faculty's job is less, putting it in our
Hmm.
other terms, de-skilling it. And what that does is that allows us to be more affordable. So that's one of the other reasons why this is harder. So 95% of universities that do course design, they follow, we say we're student centered. What that really means is it's not centered around faculty. All universities, for the most part, are centered around faculty. And what that means is faculty are given a free hand in designing courses. Now, the problem with that, online design, it's harder than anything I ever did at MIT. I can tell you that much. Like in the course, I say it's, not rocket science. It's harder than rocket science. Like what I'm just getting to that level of quality, it's that difficult. Like it's, again, the one of the key words is the design. So it's like iPhone, you're trying to get, to that type of quality. Now we're not there, but the point is that most faculty, you can wing it as a faculty, never having education training. I know Aria and Sandy, both you have education training, but what makes this difficult is the integration of all these things, including our contacts, including our students, including the overall curriculum. So that's part of why, like if it took me 5 to 8 years to get to the design develop, it's going to take some time to get there. And that's not to say it won't happen, but
Hmm.
um, that'll be a while. And you know, that's part of what you'll have to sort out. Like there's some people, and this is part of the reason why it has been difficult for a lot of, like I'll hire a faculty member from a community college where they gave them a free hand. I look at the courses they did, they're not good. And then they come to us and they want a free hand, and we're not going to do that because, my son's going through community college courses right now. They're god awful. Like they're way worse than what ChatGPT could have generated. And there's just all these problems with them, and it's because they're giving community college professors a free hand, and it just isn't working. So yeah, I don't know. Is that helpful? Or
I think so. I think it's mostly about what you're given as a foundation. Like the vice chancellor that I worked with at UTK, he gave me the foundation of what to look for. So therefore, it was easier to create the content. And really, I didn't work. I wouldn't say I created it online, if that makes any sense. So I
yeah,
created it and
okay,
formatted it, and then the instructional designer uploaded it. But I
yeah.
created everything, and then she uploaded it into the system. But I think as long as you have the content, that part can be easy. It's just time consuming.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of it also is like how generic are the courses? At most universities, 90% of their courses are you take the standard textbook, you cover what's in the textbook, and there's not that much customization. And that's fairly straightforward. And that's honestly how the field of instructional design is organized around. If you're teaching calculus, there's a fairly straightforward approach, or you're teaching accounting 101, there's a fairly straightforward approach.
Hmm.
And so there's not that much design work. Whereas for us, that's the main value. Like why do they come here rather than some other school in that? So yeah. But anyway, all right. I think this has probably gone on long enough. I'm going to go ahead and pause recording.